Opposition parties cry foul as the government looks to delay the winter session of Parliament due to the upcoming assembly elections. The Congress alleges that the NDA government is trying to avoid embarrassment on the floor of the House. The Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs, however, will make a final call come Friday.
The centre will advance the rollout of stricter auto fuel standards by 2 years, hoping that it will improve the toxic Delhi air. Bharat Stage 6 fuel norms will now be available in Delhi. Fuel, in fact, will be available in Delhi by April next year instead of the earlier April 2020 deadline.
Delhi and Haryana governments join hands in the fight against pollution after a meeting with Arvind Kejriwal. Haryana Chief Minister M.L. Khattar promises to look into large-scale stubble burning, also promises to roll out 500 CNG buses in Gurugram in a bid to curb vehicular emissions.
Spiritual Guru Shri Shri Ravi Shankar meets Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath ahead of his visit to Ayodhya, where he initiates peace talks with all stakeholders of the Mandir Masjid standoff. Meanwhile, opposition parties and some religious groups rebuff his interference in the dispute, which of course is before the court now.
On the last street, the sell-off continues for the third day on fears of a widening current account deficit and diminishing hopes of an interest rate cut. The Nifty tests levels of 10,200 on across-the-board selling. Muted corporate earnings also keep the sentiment low on the street today.
Infosys founder Narayan Murthy brushes aside previous differences with Nandan Nilekani over corporate governance issues at the tech major. Heaping praise on Nilekani, Murthy says all is well at Infosys under the current leadership.
Good evening. This is the India Development Debate right here on ET Now. I'm Supriya Srinath in New Delhi, and joining me in Mumbai is my colleague and co-anchor Sandeep Purumurthy. Let's put the spotlight on the first topic that we're debating right here on the show this evening then. It is polls over Parliament for the Modi government. It seems, consider this. The upcoming winter session of Parliament is likely to be delayed, and there is a good chance that it will be shorter than normal, thanks to the upcoming assembly elections in Gujarat. Now, last year, the winter session commenced on the 16th of November, but with the last phase of Gujarat polls scheduled for the 14th of December, there is a good chance that the winter session will start only in December, perhaps by the first week. A final decision will, however, be taken by the Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs later this week, November 17th to be precise, which is Friday.
Senior NDA leaders privately admit this could happen because most politicians are busy campaigning for state polls. The opposition parties are already up in arms, saying that they will oppose any move for a shorter winter session. As always, we at ET Now remain politically neutral, but firmly believe that lawmaking should not suffer because of political considerations, more so at a time where the country is facing an economic slowdown, recovering from the aftershocks of the note ban and GST. The pros and cons of a truncated winter session, that's our discussion point on the India Development Debate. And joining us on this political debate is Nalin Kohli, National Spokesperson of the BJP, Tom Vadakan, National Spokesperson of the Congress, Yogendra Yadav, Founder, National President, Swaraj India, and Sagarika Ghosh, Consulting Editor of the Times of India. Nalin Kohli, I will start off with you. Why the delay in announcing the winter session of Parliament? Why the delay in getting this winter session of Parliament started? Last year, the winter session started on the 16th of November. Tomorrow, the 16th, we still don't even have an idea on when it's going to start, as the CCP is expected to meet only on Friday, which is the 17th. Is it because of the Gujarat polls?
Well, it might be also because of the polls. I'm not sure of all the reasons, and I wouldn't be the right person to even answer this. Because, you know, as Parliament dates are fixed, the Speaker is involved, it's a whole mechanism in place. So it would not be correct for me to really, speak about what the larger issue is. But yes, the country is in election mode. There was the Himachal polls, there's the Gujarat polls. And, I find it ironical that a large number of political parties, no less than the Congress, when Parliament is in session, they either don't attend or they disrupt. And when Parliament session is yet to be called, then they are speaking as if every morning they would like to be in Parliament and discuss. Now, when the Parliament comes, whenever those dates are fixed, you should perhaps take a commitment that they are not going to stall the House, that they will not do this, because they are the ones and the others who are demanding for Parliament. Then they must at least show that their commitment to Parliament is there and not run away from debates at that time.
Okay, not run away from debates at that time. Just let me quickly remind you, the present finance minister does say disruption is a form of democracy. We at ET now don't support it though, because precious hours are wasted. But Tom Vadakan, why is the Congress party making such a huge hue and cry about the parliament session being delayed? It has happened in the past. Sessions have been truncated, whether it was in 2003 or 2008. In fact, even in 2013, when the Congress was in power and states like Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan and Chhattisgarh went to elections, the session was truncated from the 5th of December to the 18th. So why such a big deal right now?
Well, Supriya, let's examine the defense that the Bharatiya Janata Party has put up. There have been occasions when they have been boycotted, there have been problems, but the important interface in parliamentary democracy for the opposition and the ruling party is Parliament. If it has happened earlier, bad enough, and now to argue it out that it has a precedent and you carry on with it. See, this is basically one of the important points of the Gujarat model. You know, they have practitioners of evading assembly. They have learnt it there. They have completely removed members for almost 1 month or 15 days, and they have avoided parliament. What has been happening is they have studied and mastered the art of monologue. You see, when the Prime Minister speaks, it is one-way traffic. When the opposition leader speaks, there are certain questions raised. None of those questions are answered, and the argument is when Parliament is in session, they are avoided. Now, that is no good reason. The reason is they know very well there are issues that are coming before this country about GST, demonetization, and the fact that the economy is down the tube. These are questions that need, and pollution is one, the toxic air. The government of the day is not ready to reply, don't have answers. You have Kejriwalji passing it on, saying that he'll settle with Haryana, centre not intervening, NGT has a position. People are dying in this country of toxic air, no answers. Parliament session to be shortened, of course, decision is to be taken on Friday, be it what it may. But Parliament is the only place where the opposition and the government can have an interface, answers can be sought, because people are seeking answers. You can't avoid Parliament, shorten it what you may.
Tom,
but the point is, avoiding Parliament is not acceptable.
Okay, avoiding Parliament is not acceptable, but the fact remains, and we want to put on record that in 2013, when the UPA was in power, the same precedent was set. The session started on the 5th of December. So, just like you argue that the BJP shouldn't raise a stink on disruption because they disrupted Parliament in the last session of the Lok Sabha, it's sort of a bit of tit for tat. But Yogendra Yadav, let's look at it from a slightly broader, big picture point of view. If Parliament begins, let's assume in the first week of December, they're likely to have about 12 to 13 sittings, right? That's we had about 20 sittings in the budget session, if I'm not wrong, 19 in the monsoon session. So effectively, we're looking at a parliament that's working 60 days in a year, right? On average of 60, 67 days in a year. Till 1972, we had the parliament working at about 120 days in a year. What does that tell you about the way the parliamentary democracy is functioning?
Look, I could begin by saying, yes, the parliamentary session should be held. Yes, it should not be delayed. Yes, it should not be truncated. If it happened during Congress time, it was bad. If it's happening now, it's bad. But all that is formal statement. The real question is, does it matter? Mr. Vadakan is convinced that there is some deep conspiracy to avoid the parliament. Maybe he knows much more because he travels in those circles. I don't. I fear the reason could be much simpler and much worse. The reason could be we don't care. And this is happening across states, across parties, actually all over the country in state assemblies. State assembly sessions are truncated to 2 days or 3 days. This is happening for quite some time now, and for some time we have entered in a phase of our democracy where our democracy is only about elections. Election is the only political event that matters. The rest is all right, then the ruling party does what it likes. So there is really no accountability between elections. So it's election from election to election to election. That is what is happening. So honestly, I do not know what is worse, parliament session not taking place, or it taking place and being disrupted, or no one really bothering about whether it takes place or not. What worries me is not so much the first and the second. What worries me is the third. Does anyone really care in the country whether the parliament session would be held or not? I fear that this hallowed institution has reached a place where people say, हाँ होगा कुछ drama होगा 2-4 दिन तक. Nothing else would happen. That worries me, and that should worry all of us.
You know, you've actually hit the nail on its head. It is such a sorry state of affairs if no one in the country, you know, even bothers whether the parliament session is happening or not. And this, when we actually send our elected representatives, if we have Sagarika back, can I go across to her? Because I do want to take the question forward. Okay, I don't think I have Sagarika back, but Nalin Kohli, if Parliament begins, like Sandeep was saying, say in the first week of December, it will obviously be a truncated session. This is going to be a shorter session because, you know, then you will have the winter break come up and then there will be a budget session later on. So this is going to be a truncated session that one will see. I will just put forward 3 big legislations that are pending before Parliament. There is the Code on Wages, which will decide the minimum wages in the country. There is amendments to the Education Act. And then, of course, there's the Motor Vehicles Act, which will determine how you, I, and everybody else will be using roads in the future. Aren't these important legislations, and should these have to wait because of electioneering? Is politics only about contesting elections anymore, or have we actually elected MPs to go to Parliament and make those damn laws?
Well, first, every legislation is important. There can't be a less important or a more important. Each legislation is important, and they certainly are not damn laws. So with regard to it, I think certainly every session brings up a whole set of issues that are urgent. There are some that are important, that may not be urgent, that may immediately go to a standing committee or to a select committee. But the very fact that, Parliament is going to look at it and a law is eventually to be passed, hopefully to be passed on any matter, that is important enough. The second is with regard to the truncated sessions. Yes, there has been, it's factual what Yogendra ji is saying, that there are state assemblies that also have very short sessions. This is across the country. It's not something uniform to any one, it's not something unique to any one particular state. But that's also, I think, in terms of the nature of it, because the politics of today, we are in an election mode virtually in 5 years all the time. If they are not national levels or by-elections, then there are state assemblies. If they are not state assemblies, there are urban bodies or panchayats. It's just on. And that's why the case for simultaneous elections. It's a complex issue. It's complicated to achieve it. We used to have it, but having broken away from that system, to come back to that same thing is complex. But, that probably raises an important point. That if we want to move out of election mode in a 24-hour, 24/7, every month after month and year after year, we need to come down and finish it off in a span and then get down to working. Because that's what it is. And the nature of politics is campaigning. If you do not go out and campaign and meet with people, how are you going to get across to the electorate? So I think these are practical issues that would require not a blame game approach, but it does require looking for solutions now in today's world.
Sagarika, comment on that. We've lost the link with you, but your own view, and Yogendra Yadav made this point about the fact that what's worse is no one seems to be caring about the fact that that the parliament is not functioning right now. Let's look at the media. Which channel is debating the fact that that the parliament session has been delayed and there's no talk of it, and the larger question of politicians being focused, being permanently in electioneering mode, from one election to another election to another election. What's the way out of this? As Naren Kohli says, the simultaneous polls a solution, but what do you think is the way forward then?
I'm very glad you're debating this, Sandeep and Supriya, because as you rightly say, no other media channel is debating this important issue. The question really is, are we an electoral democracy, or are we a parliamentary democracy? Or are we simply a cephocracy and not a democracy? The parliament is at the heart of our democracy. It's been 3 months since the last session. The government is not making any announcement about the winter session of parliament. The winter session of parliament normally begins at the end of November. As Supriya pointed out, there's going to be a cabinet committee of parliamentary affairs on the 17th, but it will have to give a 15-day notice So the earliest that Parliament will start will be early December. And what kind of Parliament will it be, if it's there at all? Will it be short? Will it be long? Will it not be there at all? We still really don't know. We don't even know if the CCPA is going to happen. So I think the point that Mr. Nalin Kohli is making about electioneering and therefore we can't have Parliament is a very, very troubling statement. Are we saying that the national Parliament is held hostage to state elections? Are we saying that politicians are so busy, politicians of the government and of the opposition are so busy electioneering and fighting elections that they cannot debate important issues on the floor of the House? The House, after all, is the core of our democracy. As you mentioned, the Motor Vehicles Act, the Women's Reservation Bill, important debate on the GST, these are all pending. And the fact of the matter is, we are hearing that the ministers of the government are going to do door-to-door campaigning in Gujarat. The entire government is going to be in Gujarat. This government seems to be obsessed with the Gujarat election. So what kind of precedent does it set? Next year we have winter elections. Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan are going to go to polls next year in winter. Does it mean that then also we will stop having parliament? So, are we a parliamentary democracy or are we an electoral democracy? Are we going to hold a parliament hostage to these state elections? And also, the important issue is
Sagarika,
both the government and the opposition are complicit in this. It's not that the opposition is so dedicated to parliament.
Absolutely. Absolutely the point which I want to take forward with Tom Vadakan, but very quickly, Nalin Kohli, 30 seconds to make a quick rebuttal because you wanted to come in. Because in 2016, West Bengal elections went on and there was no disruption of parliament. Why for Gujarat? Go ahead, quickly.
Sure. Well, the first is I'd like to just point out it's not we who are obsessed. I think the media and particularly Sagarika personally probably is obsessed with Gujarat. I think Sagarika ji has always had a special attention on Gujarat for many, many years. The second part is that with regard to this, you can't have the argument both ways. That if you have, for example, there are ministers who are elected from, let's not forget, in Rajasthan and in Gujarat, all the MPs are elected by are BJP MPs. There aren't any opposition MPs from the state. So 26 Lok Sabha MPs in any case, at a time when they are elected by that electorate, are expected to be there during elections. Is that not part of democracy? Or that's to be thrown away because somebody feels, oh. And then what about the Rajya Sabha number of people who are cabinet ministers who are also from Gujarat? You can't have the argument both ways. That in democracy, you can't have the representatives of the people involved in the electioneering process. And at the same time, when they are not present, if parliament is running, then a commentator no less than Sagarika would probably sit down and say, excuse me, where are they? Why are they not attending parliament? Is this not an insult of parliament, which is the heart of democracy? So I think I was being practical by just pointing out. Yet I say, is that the reason? I don't know. You will know that on the next meeting when it takes place. Because the speaker and all the parties have to be there.
Okay. Right. You've made your point there, Nalin Kohli, but Tom Vadakan, I'm also going to ask you the question. When Parliament does function, there is so much of disruption that one sees that, everybody is tempted to call Parliament the house of disruption. This whole temple of democracy that Parliament was once called has been ridiculed to be a seat of, has been reduced to be a seat of ridicule. How are you going to defend that position? What productive work gets done when Parliament is in session? The point that Yogesh Yadav had made initially.
Supriya, I heard Mr. Kohli very attentively, and Sagarika also mentioned certain points. The point I would like to make and remind my friend Kohli is elections didn't start with Modi ji. They were there from 1947 and Parliament has functioned duly. Now, this whole business of excitement where the Prime Minister personally has to campaign district after district, door-to-door campaign like he did in Varanasi, he's become a fountainhead of election machinery without which this party is nothing. The point here is elections come and go, but Parliament have never been disrupted. Now, you question me, why is it disruptive? Now, I would like to quote the current finance minister who stood up in Parliament and said, dissent is also part of democracy. I am quoting a view expressed by the current finance minister, not the view of the Indian National Congress. I question Mr. Kohli of that wisdom and the wisdom that has been expressed now, that Congress shall not speak, Congress shall not protest. Where else do we protest? Parliament is the temple of democracy. If there is disruption, that is part of democratic practices. I request Mr. Kohli to recall Mr. Arun Jaitley, the finance minister, how he stood up those days, and those days are forgotten just because they are in the ruling party. The point is, Parliament is where you are accountable, and when you are accountable, you can't have monologue. There has to be a dialogue, and dialogue is the essence of any parliamentary meeting, session.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. Naran Kohli, I know you want to come in, but I want to take it to Yogendra Yadav. Yogendra Yadav, you know, what's your own view on this on this point being made that, you know, there's so much of disruption that you might as well not have a session of Parliament? Again, for our viewers, I want to throw some data here that the worst performance of Lok Sabha in terms of business that got done and time spent was of the 15th Lok Sabha, the last Lok Sabha, when only 23% of the time was devoted to spending bills, to bills. Only 163 bills were signed and only 335 days of sitting over a period of 5 years. To put this in context, our first Lok Sabha, which was between 1952 to 1957, 48.8% of the time was devoted to the Parliament. So if you see over a period of time, there's just been a decay, and you know, in this whole thing of there being so much of disruption in the Parliament that it doesn't matter. Do you buy that argument at all, Yogendra Yadav?
That's actually right, and that's precisely why the BJP cannot pretend to have that injured innocence.
We've lost the link there with Yogendra, but Shagrika, you want to comment on that, on the fact that, you know, that the 15th Lok Sabha's performance was probably the worst, and this you know, this bogey of there being so much of disruption that frankly doesn't matter even if Parliament functions or not. Do you see any merit in that argument, Shagrika?
Well, I think that's a valid argument, that the fact is that the opposition is also not exactly worshipping at the altar of Parliament. But before I say that, I just want to rebut Mr. Nalin Kohli on what he said about that I am obsessed with Gujarat for some reason. I mean, I don't understand how that is in any way germane to the debate that we're having. I'm a journalist and I'm obsessed with every Indian state. So to say that I particularly am personally involved in Gujarat or have some personal agenda, I think is being unfair. And I think that it's something that Mr. Nalin Kohli really need not have said. But coming back to the issue, I mean, the fact is the opposition is not exactly worshipping at the altar of Parliament. Mr. Rahul Gandhi is really not known for attending Parliament. He himself does not particularly have a distinguished parliamentary record of speaking in Parliament. And you're right, the disruptions, the kind of chaos that we keep seeing in Parliament is certainly a disservice to the House of the People. But on the other hand, you know, to disregard Parliament, to not hold Parliament. You're right, in 2013, the Parliament session did begin in December, but it went on for 30 days. So the fact is that winter sessions of Parliament have been held continuously for the last 12 years. So to not announce a winter session of Parliament, I think is saying that state elections, and particularly an important state election, is more important than the national Parliament. And I think, you know, ideologically, I think as a message, that's a very disturbing one. It's a very disturbing message that the government is sending out. If it is sending out the message that the national parliament is not as important as a state election. You know, already we've seen that the number of days that the parliament sits is coming down. We're not seeing productive days in parliament. We're also seeing that there's a legislative backlog.
Right.
There is a legislative backlog. Now, are we to assume that the government is
Sagarika,
scared of a debate? Is the government scared of a debate on the GST?
Yes.
Is the government scared of a debate on Mr. Amit Shah's son, Mr. Jay Shah, and the allegations that have been made? So these questions have to be raised.
I'm sorry, I'll have to come in there. We are very short. We are very short screwed on the show. I'll let Yogendra Yadav come in. And Yogendra Yadav, you were making a point about injured innocence. I'll let you take it forward before we lost you.
I don't think the government today can have a sense of injured innocence. You know, Congress doesn't let us function in Parliament, because that's exactly what they did in the 15th Lok Sabha. Not only did the BJP do it, for the first time in Indian parliamentarian history, the BJP came up with a theory to say this is what you ought to do. How can BJP today pretend that the Congress doesn't allow us to do so? And also, Congress should remember that from the days when Parliament work was taken seriously to today, the transition did not begin in year 2014. I am afraid the transition took place much earlier, and UPA regime was also in a fair amount guilty of that, and Congress regimes all over the country have disregarded legislatures. Let's be honest about these things. On a practical note, I agree with the point that Sagarika made. In fact, honestly, I'm less interested on the day when this session begins. All right, you people are very busy. Gujarat happens to be more important for you. You want to delay it by a few days, do it. I'm interested in the duration of the session. I'm interested in the substantive agenda of the session. I agree that theatre is a part of parliamentary functioning. Theatre is an important function. Parliament is, after all, the theatre of democracy. The trouble is that increasingly that's the only function Parliament is performing. It is merely a theatre. That's where the real problem begins. And therefore, you do not look forward to parliamentary sessions. When the farmers of this country want their serious things to be done, what do they decide? They decide to organize a parliament of their own. So on the 20th, farmers from all over the country are coming and they are organizing their own Kisan Sansad.
Right.
Now, this is not what ideally should happen. They should be able to trust that this Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha will discuss their questions.
Okay.
They don't, and that's the real tragedy.
Okay, fair enough. Naren Kohli, I want you to comment on a point that Tom Vadakan made and also on a point that Sagarika made a little earlier. Is the government running away from a debate on demonetization and GST? Because, you know, economic slowdown, there is much that the government probably needs to answer for. Is the government running away from a debate on that? Because critics say that's one of the reasons why you're delaying this winter session of Parliament.
Well, the first is, I must say that to me it was a little bit of a surprise that Mr. Yogendra Yadav and Mr. Tom Vadakan were on the identical page. So I was going to remind only my friend Tom Vadakan, but now I'll have to additionally remind even Mr. Yadav, who has good institutional memory otherwise, that the context of the obstruction was the 2G scam and what happened with the JPC and the prevention of it. We saw unprecedented scams under the UPA Congress. We haven't had a single scam under the BJP, the government of Modi ji. The fact is, in the 15th Lok Sabha, obstructionism, unfortunately, was the last resort. In the 16th Lok Sabha, obstructionism by the Congress party is the first resort, at the start of it. So context in life is very important. One does not, if you only look at it from mathematics, then I guess perhaps none of us should be on this show, because this is not a show of mathematics. It's about a political discussion, and politics always has a context. The second part is to Sagarika ji. She clearly said that this government is obsessed with Parliament, which was with Gujarat, which is a charge. And I counted it by pointing out that 26 MPs are from Gujarat in Parliament. Additionally, others who are ministers also and elected from the Rajya Sabha. And therefore, you can't have that argument both ways, that if they as people's representatives, because she also said that democracy or democracy, so if they go and do their duty in democracy of going back to the people, each MP also has a number of seats under him or her, which are the MLA seats. That's how democracy works. So then you can't have the argument that they are not attending Parliament. And I then pointed out that the obsession is with perhaps Sagarika ji related to Gujarat. She at the end said that as a journalist, I will be obsessed with why Gujarat. With all states, she's entitled to be. It's not a charge. I'm just showing the counter viewpoint.
Right. Right. You know, disruption as a mode of expression has been raised many times on this show, and I think it's only incumbent on me that I let Tom Vadakan have the last word, because the Congress keeps raising that issue. And Mr. Vadakan, you know, the point that Naren Kohli made, disruption was a tool that they resorted to when the country was witness to many scams, quoting him. But can that be a tool in the 16th Lok Sabha is the big question. And should that be a tool at all? And is that productive? I mean, I understand that Parliament is not a soap factory and will not manufacture laws at the pace at which HUL makes soap bars. But Parliament is meant to discuss, dissent, debate, and then decide. That is not happening.
Supriya, I would like to remind my honored spokesman, Nalin Kohli, that you need to investigate a scam. If you do not investigate this scam, what do? There is a CAG which institutionalized scam after scam. But let me tell you something on record today. Telecommunication Ministry, the CAG pointed out a defect. And what happened? They had a private auditor sitting above the CAG. If this is the kind of game plan BJP adopts and tries to cover up scam after scam, and my friend, of course, he has a duty to give his party a clean chit. But I would like to remind Mr. Kohli that time cannot wait. Parliament is the place where these things will get exposed. So if there is dissent, whatever you like to pronounce it as,
Right.
the point is, Mr. Kohli, days are very dark. The wheel is turning full round. Your scams are going to overpower this country.
Okay.
You really don't
All right.
know what's going to hit.
Okay.
Parliament is the place to put it before the people and have some accountability,
Okay.
which you're running away from.
Okay. I'm afraid we're completely out of time there. Thank you to all our panelists, Shagarika,
We do
Yogendra
know that
Yadav, Naran
Mr.
Kohli,
Vadakan as now also soothsayer.
and Tom Vadakan. We'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for taking time out and joining us in the first edition of the India Development Debate. Polls over Parliament may not be rare or unprecedented, but Parliament is a seat of legislation. It must never be held hostage to any event, even if it's an important state election. After all, we want Parliament to discuss GST, demonetization, the economic slowdown. We want Parliament to discuss and find a remedy for the deadly smog, or discuss bank recapitalization, the NPA crisis, and a host of other legislations that need to be cleared.
Well, absolutely. Disruption, of course, may be an expression of protest in Parliament, but the Parliament can't resort to that one expression alone. We elect our MPs to legislate, and that is what we will hold them accountable for. And for that to happen, Parliament should be convened and given adequate time to function. After all, that is what parliamentary democracy is all about. On that note, we take a really quick breather. We are back in a moment from now with Saving Telecoms. 75,000 jobs gone in a year. How bad are things in telecommunication?
Keep it with ET Now. Back in a moment with the India Development Debate.